Yo, what's up everybody? As usual, it's your boy Lahim here, and today I'm going to be showing you guys a couple techniques you can use to help you really flesh out your chord progressions and have them sound very interesting and kind of tailored to your particular sound. But before we go ahead and get into it, if you kind of struggle with music theory or you're kind of new to it or whatever, I would definitely make sure you check out the video I'm going to put in the info card above. That just goes over the kind of the basic music theory stuff. It'll get you caught up, and also I'll watch the part 1 of this video, which I'll also put in the same card, which goes over kind of some techniques that we're also going to be using in this video and kind of building upon. But yeah, with that being said, let's go and hop right in. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is something called barred chords, which in my personal opinion is probably one of the best techniques you'll ever learn. So before we start talking about barred chords, we need to discuss something called parallel keys. And parallel keys is pretty simple. So for example, if your song is in C major, the parallel key would be C minor. This is different from the relative minor of C major, which is A minor. And I can't stress that enough. You don't want to get that mixed up. You'll end up having a lot of weird situations. So when we talk about borrowing chords, what we're doing is essentially borrowing chords from the parallel key of the key we're currently in. So for example, if I start my song in C major, I can borrow chords from C minor, and I'll have borrowed chords. I'll introduce a different tonality. So why would you want to use borrowed chords? Well, because to put it simply, it just introduces more tonality or more chords into the available chords you have per any key you're in. So for example, if you're in C major, normally you only have access to 7 chords. But if you introduce borrowed chords into the mix, now you have 14 chords available and all their actual combinations. So yeah, with that being said, I think it's time to look at some examples. So in front of us, I have a couple different chord progressions that we're going to look at, but particularly I just want to point out what each one is doing. So the first chord progression, which is this one in red, is just a basic 1, 6, 4, 5 in C major. And keep in mind, these all are in C major. The second one, which is blue, is 1 flat 6, 5, 4, and also in C major. But this one chord here is borrowed from C minor. And then lastly, I have 1, 6, 5, 4 minor from C minor. And once again, this is the borrowed chord. And keep in mind with the blue and the brown, they're both using borrowed chords. The red is the only one that is not using borrowed chords. I can't specify that enough. So let's start off by giving the red one a listen, then we'll listen to the other two and kind of compare them and see how they sound. So that chord progression sounds fine. It's a pretty normal chord progression you would hear all the time. It's a pretty classic one at that. But now let's see what it will sound like when we add in that flat 6 instead of the 6 that we have in C major. And keep in mind, so we can hear a crazy difference. All of a sudden the chord progression sounds a lot more almost tense. It has a different energy to it, and that's because we switched out the 6 chord for the flat 6 chord. And keep in mind, there's some major differences between the two chords. So the first major difference, so normally when we have that 6 chord appear, it's minor, but in C minor, which is the parallel of C major, which is the scale we're in, it's major. So that's what makes the huge difference. That's what gives it that striking energy that it has all of a sudden. It sounds very distinct. Can't really put a word to it, but it sounds a lot different. So the first thing we want to take note of with this chord progression too is that we're trading out for the same exact scale degree. So what I mean by that is when I traded out the 6 chord, I didn't trade it out for the 5 minor chord or the 4 minor chord. I traded out for the flat 6 chord. So I'm trading for its parallel chord, if you can use that term. And so that's the main trick, making sure that you borrow the correct chord. You can't use chords that just have a similar function. Although it won't sound incorrect, it won't be the achieved effect we're looking for. So now let's go back and listen to the last chord progression. Just a note real quick, instead of it going 1, 6, 5, 4 minor like I had it before, now I'm going to have it go 1 flat 6, 5, 4 minor. So now that's 2 borrowed chords. So just keep that in mind when we listen to it. So as we can hear, that flat 6 and 4 minor added a whole different distinct character to the chord progression that I originally didn't have. And that's why barred chords are so powerful, because it allows you to add much more characteristic to your chord progression than originally would have had. Keep in mind, this is just a brief overview. If you guys want to see a more detailed video about it, definitely let me know down below and I can do a whole huge video on it. But with that, let's jump into the next technique. So the next thing we're going to talk about actually uses barred chords. And this is a pretty simple one, but it's underused and it should be used a lot more. And it's basically starting your chord progression off not with the one chord. So as we know, there's 3 chord groups, which is tonic, predominant, and dominant. So the one chord that most chord progressions start off with obviously belongs to the tonic group. It's one of the beginning chords or the home chords. But there's also 2 other chords in that group, which is the 3 chord and 6 chord if you're in a major scale, or the flat 3 and flat 6 if you're in a minor scale. But because we have barred chords now, we can expand that to say there's actually 4 chords in any given time we can use, or technically 6, which is the 1 chord, the 1 minor, the 3, the 6, the flat 3, and the flat 6. Those are all available starting chords you can choose. So now let's take a listen and see what it would sound like if we started on any other chord but 1 major. So what I've gone ahead and done is just edited the old chord progressions to have any other chord but 1 to start off with. So as usual, the red one is our home bass. It's going to be the 1, 6, 4, 5 with no changes. It's just a straight original. The blue one, although, what we've done is we've changed it to have a 1 minor. So now it goes 1 minor, flat 6, 5, major, 4, major. And then with the brown, now instead of starting on the 1, it starts on 3 minor, then it goes flat 6, 4 minor. So let's listen to the original first, then listen to the other 2, and let's see how they sound. Alright, so that's the original one. So now let's listen to the blue one again. So very quickly, we can hear there's a distinct difference between that 1 major chord and the 1 minor chord. The 1 minor chord sounds way darker, but in kind of like a pleasing way, versus the 1 major chord, which is very much more bright. And so in context, it makes the whole chord progression sound a little bit darker sounding. But the main thing here is that it's very distinct from the 1 major chord. So now let's hop back in and see what it sounds like when we start with the 3 minor chord, which is in C major, instead of the 1 major chord like we're used to. And once again, we hear that that 3 chord sounds very distinct and different from the 1 chord as well. This is why it's such a powerful technique. You can really break the listener's expectation by using a combination of barred chords and just not starting with the 1 chord as well. And this is why barred chords is such a powerful technique, because it really expands the amount of chords and possibilities you have available per any given chord progression. But yeah, with that being said, let's jump into the third technique, which is something called cadence. So essentially, at the last technique was to change how we look at how we start chord progressions. Cadence is the opposite. It looks at how we end chord progressions. So there's 4 distinct cadences, and they go by the names of plagal, half cadence, deceptive, and authentic cadence. So why are we so concerned about cadences anyways? Well, the main idea behind a cadence is that we can resolve our chord progressions in such a way where the ending sounds pleasing and it wraps back around into itself in a pleasing manner. So let's look at an example of each one in action. So the first cadence we're going to look at is the one known as authentic cadence. And this cadence basically means your chord progression ends in 5-1. And by that I mean that your chord progression can end in 5 major or minor going to 1 major or minor. So essentially we include the bar chords or the parallel chords in there as well. And just to mention also, well, this chord progression goes 1, 6, 5 major to 1 major. So it's just standard C major. So let's give it a listen and see how it sounds. So another term for the authentic cadence is also known as the regal cadence, because it has a very regal feeling. Basically, it sounds very uplifting. So if you ever want an uplifting sound to your chord progression, definitely include this cadence in, and it will work for either 5 minor or major. It doesn't matter. And the same thing for 1 minor or major. Whatever combination of those chords you choose, it will work. It will give that uplifting feeling. So the next cadence we're going to look at is going to be the half cadence. So the half cadence is essentially when your chord progression just ends in 5. So there is no 1 immediately after in the phrase. So in this case, we have a 4-bar phrase just like the last chord progression, but instead of the chord progression going 5-1, because every chord was 1 bar, now we just hold out the 5. So now let's give this a listen and see how it sounds. And just to note as well real quick, keep in mind we still have this 1 minor to flat 6 in here. So it's going to sound a little bit different, but it's still the same concept. So the major thing about the half cadence that makes it very distinct is that without the 1 to be there immediately after the 5 chord, all that tenseness that we have from the 5 chord or from that dominant energy stays. So it almost feels like the chord progression is very tense feeling in comparison to when we just resolve it to the back to the 1 immediately like we had before. So that's kind of the difference between them. But keep in mind with half cadence, you have to not use the 1 chord after. If you do, it's going to be an authentic cadence, which isn't bad. But if you're trying to use this technique, just keep that in mind. So now let's look at the next cadence, which is my personal favorite, which is known as the amen cadence or the plagal cadence. So the plagal cadence is very similar to the authentic cadence with only one major difference. Instead of going from 5 to 1, now the chord progression has to end in 4 to 1. And keep in mind, once again, that can be 4 minor or major, and also can be 1 minor or major. It doesn't matter. As long as it's 4 to 1 in any of those combinations, it's a plagal cadence. So let's give it a listen and see how it sounds. So the distinct characteristic of the plagal cadence is that it's a very softer sounding version of the authentic cadence, which is very rough and intense sounding in comparison. It's just a lot more softer sounding. You'll see this used a lot in like lo-fi hip hop and stuff because they don't want to have a lot of energy going. They just want it to resolve correctly, but also not be pushing the envelope too far forward. So this is a good chord progression of trying to make something chill that's very vibey. So the last cadence we're going to look at is the one known as deceptive cadence, which you will see in a second why it's known as that. So the deceptive cadence is very similar to the authentic cadence with one major difference, and that is instead of ending on the 1 chord like we're used to, we end on the 6 chord. And keep in mind, once again, that can be 6 major or minor. So that's why it's in deceptive cadence, because you set the listener up to think they're going to hear the 1 chord and they switch it up on them. Which is why I was saying earlier that using chords other than the 1 chord is a very powerful technique, and that it switches up the listener's expectation to something different. But yeah, with that being said, let's give it a listen and see how it sounds. So as we can hear the deceptive cadence, it almost kind of sounds like a bummer, you know, and that's why another term for this cadence is called the bummer cadence, because it basically sets you up for the happy 1 chord or kind of the home feeling 1 chord where you feel like you've arrived, but it hits you with the 6 minor chord or 6 major chord, which sounds like a bummer instead. So that pretty much is it for today, guys. As usual, if you have any questions, you just need any clarification or anything, definitely comment in the comment section down below and I'll make sure to respond and answer your question. With that being said, if you like the video and you like me, go ahead and make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the bell button so you stay notified when I post new stuff. Also, while you're at it, go ahead and make sure to hit the like button and comment down below and let me know what you want to see next. I'm down for doing any video, just let me know, especially if you're sampling videos. And lastly, most importantly, go ahead and make sure to follow my Instagram and TikTok at LahimiBeats. I post cool content all the time and extra videos that don't end up on YouTube. And also, while you're at it, if you want to help the channel and support me, check out my affiliate links down below. You can get 7% off your first year purchase with DistroKid, and also you can get $50 off your purchase of a cool MIDI guitar called the Jammy that I'll be doing a review on soon. And lastly, most importantly, I appreciate you guys stopping by. Hope you guys have a good day. As usual, Lahima out.